and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, and today we're doing something a little different. We're still currently downstairs at the moment. The office is still being set up, we're laying down new carpets, we're getting the bookcases all kind of arranged, literally right in front of me. I can see the IKEA sets right there, they're ready to be assembled. We've got the office, we've got the chairs, we've got so much to do in this house while doing a new job, which I've recently started. So bear with me. And for this video, I think it'd be really fun to talk about the Monsterverse Phase 1. Let's talk about these kind of movies in just a really fun, kind of casual way. And if I get around to doing the Criterion versions of these films, like the original Godzillas, the original King Kongs, if people like this kind of content, I'm really getting into kind of Japanese cinema and kind of those kind of folk tale, monster lore kind of stuff, please comment down below. I can cover some of that stuff on the channel also. And I think it'd be really fun to kind of dive into a different aspect of the traditional kind of monster movies from the Japanese cinema, but also this is the American take on it and my thoughts and opinions, which are very kind of, up and down in terms of my opinions on the films themselves. But I've recently rewatched all 4 of these movies on the glorious 4K edition. This is the box set Steelbook edition from Warner Brothers. I picked this up from my girlfriend, who is a big fan of these films, and I wasn't a big fan. I kind of liked the last one. My opinions have really gone up and down a lot between the other 3 movies, and I figured I want to give these another chance. I want to give these another shot, and while in the process of just kind of treating my girlfriend, I picked this really nice edition set, which I can't briefly show you there. It's called Monsterverse there, which is awesome, and you get this really nice, snazzy Steelbook editions. This Monsterverse I think is quite fascinating to me because each film has kind of evolved and changed and kind of found its footing as it's gone along. It's taken quite a few years to get to that place, but Warner Brothers clearly have something on their hands. They did the terrible 90s Godzilla Roman epic version, which I rewatched recently. Absolutely awful. I'm not talking about that. Don't watch it. It doesn't hold up. It's terrible. Less say about that the better. But going to 2014, clearly Warner Brothers and Legendary wanted to bring back this really badass character and to obviously to compete with Marvel and DC and some of the other kind of established universes. And obviously cinematic universes are really popular. Some fail, some don't do well, some have to change and evolve over time. And this one is definitely a really good example of a series that has really had to listen to its feedback, listen to its audience reactions, engage in those reviews, see what people want, what people don't want. Different directors every single time, different kind of visions on these takes of these characters, and it finally kind of lands on a nice, good, soft spot by the end, which I think is quite fascinating as I kind of rewatched the series recently. And starting with Godzilla, these are not going to be full, massive breakdown reviews. I'm just kind of going through a little bit of my thoughts and opinions on them. And if you guys want to interact and kind of talk about this one as well, please comment down below. I haven't seen any of the original Godzilla movies, which is why I kind of want to talk about these first, and then I dive back. So yeah, Godzilla, the first one, 2014. Upon rewatching, I actually quite enjoyed this. I actually got a lot more out of it on my first, watching the cinemas way back in the day. And I didn't like it because it didn't have much Godzilla, and I thought the characters weren't great, and that's been a problem throughout all the movies. And upon rewatching it and seeing it as a part 1 as a 4 movies, I think it's a good way to kind of see it and to see this mythology being built up, and the approach to it being like, these are titans have been reawoken kind of thing. They've been there, we haven't seen them, we've just been hidden away underground. And then this leads to kind of the rest of the movies kind of dealing with the fact they have to live in a world now where these monsters do exist and we have to share the world with them. Fascinating idea. And the fact that this film is practically just a first response based movie. This is everyone just responding to this instant happen. They've rewoken a creature they shouldn't have woken. It's been taking years for this thing to kind of hatch, and Godzilla is on the way to come and stop it. And I like the perspective of the military and some of these smaller characters that are in the film that just kind of like, oh shit, okay, we need to steal these creatures away. We need to kind of think of ideas. And there is a lot of casualty, there's a lot of death in the film, there's a lot of destruction just by the fact of these monsters existing and being so enormous and massive. They're destroying things and killing people just by pure stomping on the ground or knocking a building by accident kind of thing. There's not even a fight, and there's still much destruction. And I like the procedure of it. I think it's so intense, and the music really helps the film quite a lot. It's definitely 100%. Bryan Cranston makes the first portion of the film really well done, and I really like his character a lot. And then the second that character is no longer in the film, it kind of goes on to Anya Taylor-Johnson, which has got no real charisma or charismatic kind of character to kind of get behind, but they do the smart thing and basically don't go into that relationship or that aspect of a character, but they just go for like, shit, this guy needs to go from point A to point B. You know, plan messes up. Okay, the next plan, let's just go for that. It's just the film is constantly moving. So rush, rush, rush. And yes, there isn't much Godzilla. Yes, the main best part of the entire film, probably in terms of a fight, in terms of a action scene, is towards the end. But I don't mind it in terms of part one of a 4-part series. As an individual movie, when it came out, even by itself, not so great, pretty lackluster, but better still than the terrible 90s Godzilla. So in terms of a part one of a 4, it's actually pretty solid, and actually, in hindsight, sets up a lot of stuff that the other movies do take advantage of as well. And I think it's a good one to kind of set the groundwork for. Obviously, some trial and error there, but they definitely find its footing as the film goes on.
Through the power of seamless editing, you did not notice it's a completely different day, and I will continue on like nothing has ever happened. Next up, we have Kong Skull Island. This was released a couple of years after Godzilla, and upon rewatching this one, it's about the same opinion I had before originally. It's gone up slightly a bump. Well, the first one was a more first response based movie, and I got more appreciation out of the military's reaction and trying to fast thinking and kind of problem solving on the day, and them just trying to deal with like these two monsters. This one has that kind of like intensity, that kind of edge, fast paced nature within the first 20 minutes or so of the film, right up until this sequence where the introduction of Kong himself, and then after that it becomes a bit more of a kind of a day in the life of Skull Island. Just Kong just doing his thing, fighting monsters, having food, just doing his stuff, while all these kind of different characters, as a group of characters, are on different parts of the island. Two of the teams get separated, and one is played by Samuel Jackson, who is basically just hell-bent on killing this kind of creature and making sure he doesn't kind of survive, not for saving humanity reasons, but his own demons. He's the last of his platoon. The war is ended practically. Vietnam is over, and he feels a bit robbed of not getting his glorious kind of nature in battle, and he's very driven to take on this kind of creature and anything else that gets in his way, whether it is human, whether it's non-human. And his performance, it definitely helps the film a little bit, when they do use him, especially towards the kind of late second into the third act. He's pretty fun, and he has some of the best moments visually and just, presence-wise and character-wise, definitely. But the problem is with this film, similar to the first one, is that all of his characters are pretty bland. They're either not enough character development, or should have just removed the characters in general. There's 10 characters in this film. I know some of them are there for body count, some are there for just, to exposition, or just for reasons. They do kill off quite a few characters in the film, granted, especially towards that fantastic opening sequence with Kong. But it just kind of feels there's too many characters, or just not enough development within those characters to actually care. And I just kind of got a little bit bored towards the middle part of it. I think it loses steam very quickly, and I think it loses some of that kind of intense kind of unknown nature towards the film's going for. It's nearly a 2-hour film, I think, or maybe 2 hours 20, I believe. I think it's a pretty lengthy film, and I think you can shave up quite a bit of time off this. This should have been basically a 90-minute film, or maybe an hour and 40. The characters let this film down mainly, and I think there's not enough story to justify the runtime. Kong himself is actually pretty fun, pretty badass, and definitely has the kind of the spotlight and some really kick-ass moments in the film for sure. And I really like what they do with him, being the fact he's only had the same type of story kind of being repeated over and over again during his kind of first iteration, the 50s, and obviously Peter Jackson's version, which I actually generally do like that good take on the character. Overall, I think Kong Skull Island is a kind of just an okay movie. I think it starts off pretty strong. It gets a bit weak and a bit boring and a bit kind of, rinse and repeat towards the middle. I think the characters are just kind of, one-dimensional or non-existent, or there's too many characters or not enough development. The action's pretty fun when there is action. There's some nice visual effects moments. It's a bit of a filler entry in this kind of 4-part series, and it kind of is just there to basically set up the next movie. Third entry we have is Godzilla King of Monsters. Now, this film I watched in IMAX 3D when it was first released, and I hated it. I thought this was absolutely terrible. I didn't like the direction they took this film in. Granted, I was only watching these films once when they came out, during the individual kind of years they did, and I didn't particularly like Godzilla at the time, I didn't particularly like Kong at the time, and I had more higher hopes of this because the trailers, the marketing, the idea that they're going full force, these monsters, they should give me what I want, monsters fighting on the big screen, just kick ass, make Godzilla actually fucking Godzilla, this legendary kind of creature that I've always been heard about. And upon rewatching and retrospect, I got more out of it. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's a flawless movie by any means. I think there's definitely some issues with it, but I like the mythology. I like what they did with the world itself. I like the idea of the organization. Monarch is just basically had different facilities kind of sealed off, and all these kind of creatures are monitoring them. Technologies are far more advanced in this one, almost kind of like stealth craft, and the idea that the military and these different organizations are learning from living in a world now where these titans are basically going to hatch and rain terror upon these cities. And I like the idea that we as a society are learning and trying to be adapting around them. They're keeping close watch on Godzilla. He's the savior from the last movie, and they want to make sure that he's protected, and they're communicating with him. I like the fact they actually bring back characters and references from the first two as well. I think it's a nice kind of like little series. Each one's carefully monitored, and they're actually bringing up scenarios that went wrong in the previous ones and learning from that. This one's from the director of Trick or Treat and Krampus, which I'm a big fan of his work. I really like his kind of those two movies. I think they're really fun, and I think they're just so creative for kind of small scale movies. Him getting a big budget movie like this for Warner Bros. I think is a massive accomplishment, and I think this film does have a lot more tension. I think it does have a lot more kind of high stakes, and it definitely keeps the film quite fast paced, which I really appreciate over the last entry. I still think some of the characters aren't perfect. I don't particularly agree with some of the statements from the main villain character, in terms of giving the world back to the Titans and letting nature come back. And it's kind of like you've set this whole plan in motion, and yet you're wondering why it's all backfiring, or why nature's got a different plan itself. You've got this epic three-headed creature, dragon creature, which is fantastic and really kind of takes on kind of Godzilla and all these other creatures that are popping up in the film. Stronger attempts at characterization. I don't really care about this kind of family squabble thing going on. More cheesy, it's getting a bit more kind of loose, a bit more fun, and having the Trick or Treat director is definitely the right approach to go to a all epic big blowout kind of Godzilla movie, and they go full scale for it, and they go massive, they go big, the film is relentless. It just keeps on going, and it gets really, really silly. And I think you have to go into that mindset with it. Godzilla King of Monsters, I definitely got a lot more out of it on a second watch, and retrospective with watching these movies as a series, I got a lot more out of it in terms of continuing the storyline and the idea of society is changing alongside it, and technology and the mythology, and us as a species are learning from them, and they're learning from us, and this idea of mutual respect, and playing with fire, and obviously teasing there's other things going on. Obviously this creature's meant to be from space, so that's a different thing. It's not part of the chain kind of Titan order, which I think is quite fascinating. Each one is definitely improving on the previous entry in terms of just getting the films to where it needs to go. And I think this is definitely a good step up from the last one for sure, and obviously from Godzilla. And this is a big, goofy, fun, popcorn-based movie. And last but not least, we have Godzilla vs Kong, a epic showdown for the ages, and an actual one that actually delivers for sure. This is fucking brilliant. This is really fun. I actually think this is the best one out of all four movies, and I think why it's the best one, because it just gets to the point and it just gives you what you want. Let them fight. It just does it. And the good thing about it is that it actually gives way more mythology, way more time and effort into Kong's character, and giving him more of a, I think it's meant to be about 30, 40 years after the events of Kong, so he's much more old, he's not as young compared to who he was, and the idea of him seeking family, and this idea of again adding to the mythology of these two have fought before in the past in some of a primal era, some primal time, and he's the only one that can take on against Godzilla. Godzilla's really pissed off. He's a lot more aggressive. He's a lot more angry in this one. He's going around destroying facilities. He's not the savior anymore. Something has happened with Godzilla in this one, and he is just going out there destroying havoc for reasons that we find out during the film, of course. And I like the attention to detail more so on Kong, because he's only had one movie, where Godzilla's had two, and he's established he's the king of monsters, he's the ruler of this kind of the land, And I like the idea they actually pay off the Hollow Earth, the actual idea of portals traveling into new different parts of the world. And this has been set up since the first movie, and this has been touched upon within every single one. They reference this within, Kong Skull Island, the idea that Skull Island's underneath the Hollow Earth. Godzilla King of Monsters had the idea that Godzilla's using many kind of portals under the world, under Earth, to basically transport to different locations throughout the actual Earth itself. That's why you can get to locations faster, that's why you can travel faster. I think it's quite fascinating. So they actually do pay that off, and again, technology is so ridiculous and so purple and futuristic and so, crazy 80s kind of, references and retro type based stuff. It just works, it's fun, it's a really fun kind of entry, and they minimize the characters' interactions. They kind of do the bare minimum with the characters. They just kind of, these characters need to get to point A to point B. They're not terrible, they're not underwritten, they're not overwritten, they're just there to serve a purpose. It's a little bit of light characterization, and then the main tension, the main focus is on these two badasses to go against each other. And I think they do a lot more with Kong and actually make him a lot more emotional, give him a lot more high stakes in the film, give him a reason to kind of fight. And I like the kind of the third act twist. With Mechagodzilla, I think that was a nice little add-on to the idea of them teaming up, which is great. This one, I think, just it's taken 3 movies to get to this, in my personal opinion, in terms of just understanding what the audience want, and paying attention to the little details. Give us the monster-based movie, give us light characterization. We don't care about characters unless you're going for an Oscar or something. I don't care. I'm not watching that for that. Give us a good entry into the next series, and I think this is a really good closing chapter in this kind of first phase of monster-based movies, monster universe movies. It kind of doesn't tease any more movies. It kind of sets the stakes of, Kong is the ruler of his kind of domain of the Hollow Earth, and then Godzilla is the reign of Earth itself, the top layer, and these are the mutual respected alliance between them two. And I quite like where the film ends up and where it leaves. And again, destructibility, casualties. I even like the little small details of there's like Titan fallout shelters, because any city, any point can be under attack. And the idea that, man is trying to get back on top with apex kind of industries. You're creating Mechagodzilla, messing with technology, messing with things they shouldn't understand. Again, it's a good little continuing on these ideas of where we think we are in this world, and, our bitterness to this new environment, and, people not accepting the fact that we are no longer top of the food chain. A really fun, beat-up monster film, CGI heavy film. Again, it's not going to win any awards, it's not going to be like the best film ever made, but out of the 4 movies, it's definitely my favourite out of the ones, and it's a really good closing chapter. There is current talk at the moment of Godzilla vs Kong 2 with Adam Wingard returning back to direct, and I'm very curious to see what they will do for a second entry in this series. The fact they're willing to do a second one straight away, have these 2 massive titans, which is fantastic. So definitely are building something up for this next phase. We also have a further prequel to Kong as well, and I think Skull Island, and maybe exploring that even further, maybe with the native tribes and all that kind of stuff. So I think there will be something interesting there to explore. Apple TV are doing their kind of monster universe with Kurt Russell and his son, more of a kind of human-based kind of drama. The idea of what is this world now, and the mythology of this world now, with Titans being just a regular kind of mundane thing out there in the world. So that's interesting. So you got a few different projects, a few different TV shows and movies in the works. These films are very expensive to make for Warner Brothers, and I'm sure they want to do really well, and I'm sure they want to make sure the next one delivers. So why mess around? Let's just do a full-on blown next team up movie and do some smaller projects in between to build up. So very curious to see what else they'll have to do and to see what the next phase is going to be. That's my thoughts and opinions. Please stay tuned for the next upcoming video, which is going to be a very special one for me for sure. So in the meantime, guys, down for the reviews. Signing out.